Do you ever find yourself burnt out in an online lesson or an e-learning module? That is usually not a you problem, it's a design problem. Many instructional materials overload learners because they do not account for cognitive load. When designers reduce unnecessary mental strain, learning becomes easier, faster, and more meaningful. In a lot of contexts, we are taught to push through and pack in as much content as possible, assuming more information leads to better outcomes. But research shows the opposite can happen. Richard Mayer, UC Santa Barbara professor and brain scientist, explains that poor design choices can overload the brain and block learning. Mayer's work highlights that we process information through two main channels, an auditory channel and a visual or reading channel. When these channels are balanced, learners can move information from working memory into long-term memory, where it can actually be used and applied. When they are overloaded, learning can break down. To address this, Mayer developed the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, which includes 5 key principles that help reduce extraneous cognitive load. These principles guide instructional designers in creating material that supports how the brain actually learns. So let's walk through those 5 principles and how you can apply them to learning experiences that actually stick. Let's start with our first principle, the coherence principle. This is just cutting anything that doesn't directly support the learning goal. Eliminate extra text, decorative images, background music, random fun facts, even stuff that makes it feel engaging can actually distract your learner. To see the coherence principle in action, let's compare 2 educational videos side by side. The first one is going to be by Rational Animation that explains global poverty and what we can do about it.
Through cash transfers, we'll need to raise enough funds and send them to the people who need them. We also need to be sure that we are actually helping the recipients and not hurting people who are not receiving anything.
This educational video is about food prices and global poverty, but do you notice anything in this video that is unnecessary? This mascot of a dog can be taken out to make sure that the viewer is only focused on the learning objective. Now let's take a look at good coherence principle in practice through this TED Ed animation on the same topic.
Spending billions funding education, job training, agricultural development, infrastructure projects, and healthcare programs.
Even though these images come quickly, it's easier for the viewer to follow along with the narrator. They are straightforward and do not include any unnecessary images or text. Research shows that people can actually learn better from simpler, more focused content. Not because the extras are confusing, but because they pull the attention away. So when you're designing, just ask, does this actually help someone understand the concept? If not, simply cut it out. The next principle is signaling. So coherence is about removing stuff. Signaling is about pointing people to what matters. Even in a clean lesson, learners still have to figure out what's important. Signaling helps making that obvious. Nothing is worse than opening up an e-learning module and met with a wall of black text. A simple signaling fix could be breaking it up into flashcards with clear steps at the top, bold titles, and even bolding some words throughout the text. Other simple moves include using color to group ideas and to help preview what's to come next. You're not adding new info, you're simply just making the structure clear. And that frees up a lot of mental energy for actually understanding. The next principle is redundancy. This one catches a lot of people. Redundancy says don't present the same information in multiple ways at the same time. The classic mistake in design is putting your full script on the slide while also reading it out loud. Now the learner is doing 2 things at once, trying to read and listen. Both are competing for attention. For example, this study.com video geared towards high school and college students, teaches about different types of federalism. Let's listen in.
Cooperative federalism, 1901 to 1960, saw federal and state governments working together to address societal and economic problems.
As you can see, the narrator is reading what's on the screen. There are also subtitles. So if the learner wants to read what the narrator is saying, they can turn on the subtitles. To follow the redundancy principle, have strong narration and good visuals. That's all the learner needs without exhausting their cognitive function. For a good example of the redundancy principle, let's look at this video from Vox Media that also uses text as its imagery.
Called A Measuring Rod for Textbooks. It was written by the illustrious Southern historian Miss Mildred Rutherford, an educator, orator.
This is a good example of how you can use text to help illustrate your points for the learner without forcing them to read that text. So the real question is, am I adding this text because it helps, or is it just because it feels safer to include? That's where usually people get stuck. Make sure it is always helping. The next principle is spatial contiguity. This one is about placement. Put things close together. If you've got a diagram on one side and all the labels on the other, the learner has to keep going back and forth to connect them. And that will take a lot of energy. If you just label things directly on the diagram, that connection is immediate. This matters a lot with anything complex. If you're using diagrams, processes, systems, let the layout do the work so the learner doesn't have to. The fifth principle is temporal contiguity. It's the same idea but with timing. Show and explain things at the same time. As a good example for this principle, and also spatial contiguity, let's look at this Animagraphs video showing how a steam locomotive works.
Now, let's get into the details of each system, starting with the firebox, where coal is burned to make heat. At the bottom of the firebox, a bed of coals sits on top of special movable metal grates.
As you can see, this video uses the principles of spatial and temporal contiguity as it moves around the locomotive to show the learner the various parts. So the big picture. Extraneous cognitive load is all the unnecessary effort your design creates, and you actually have a lot of control over that. Coherence, cut out the extra stuff. Signaling, show people what really matters. Redundancy, don't overload them with the same information. Spatial contiguity, keep the related things close together. Temporal contiguity, make sure that things line up in time. All of these are just simple ways to make it easier for people to focus on the actual learning. Think about something you've made or a learning module you've been part of. Did it break any of these principles? What would you change?